And we're continuing with the fourth chapter of An Acceptable Time by Madeleine L'Engle. The morning passed without incident. Polly spent an hour with her grandmother in the lab, till her toes grew too cold. Then she went to her room to sit at her desk and write out responses to some of the questions her grandmother had asked her. She found it unusually difficult to concentrate. At last she shut her notebook and went downstairs. It was time for a brisk walk before lunch. She had promised not to walk across the field to the woods and the star-watching rock, so she walked along the dirt road the house faced. Originally it had been one of the early post roads, but with the changing of demographics it was now only a lane. The garage led to a paved road, with farms above, a few dwellings below. The lane wandered along, past pastures, groves, bushes. It was a pleasant place to walk, and Polly ambled along, picking an assortment of flowering autumn weeds. When she got home, Dr. Louise had called to say that she had an emergency and would not be able to get away for dinner. Could they come the next day? Nays very much wanted to be with Polly on Thursday. Thursday came, crisp and beautiful. The autumn days were perfect, blue and gold, with more and more leaves falling. Polly worked with her grandfather in the morning, studying some advanced mathematics. Around 11, he took off for town to get his chainsaw sharpened, and her grandmother, as usual, went to the lab. She walked to the end of the lane and back, a little over a mile. Then she crossed the field to the stone wall. She would go no farther than that. Surely just to the stone wall should be all right. Louise the larger was there, basking in the sun. Polly was used to all kinds of odd marine animals, and her father had once had a tank for eels for some experimental purpose, but she knew little about snakes. Polly looked at Louise, lying placidly in a puddle of golden light, but she did not feel enough at ease to sit down on the wall beside her. As though aware of her hesitancy, Louise raised her head slightly, and Polly thought the snake nodded at her kindly before sliding down into the wall and out of sight. Or was she anthropomorphizing, reading human behavior into the snake? Snake in Ogham was naske. It was on the bishop's vocabulary list, so that meant that the people who used that language knew about snakes. She continued to stare at the wall, but when there was no sign of Louise after a few minutes, Polly sat down. The stones felt warm and comforting. This was as far as she could go without breaking her promise. The breeze ruffled the leaves remaining on the trees, which leaned over the wall, making shifting patterns of light and shadow. The day was gold and amber and russet and copper and bronze, with occasional flashes of flame. A rustling sound made her turn around, and there, on the other side of the wall, stood the tow-headed young man holding his spear. He beckoned to her. "I can't come. I'm sorry, I promised," she explained, and realized he could not understand her. She smiled and pointed to him. He smiled at her, pointed to himself. "Tav," she returned his smile. "Polly," she replied, pointing at herself. He repeated after her, "Polly." Then he looked up, pointed at the sun, then pointed at her hair, and clapped his hands joyfully. "I'm just an old carrot top," she blushed, because he was obviously admiring her hair. Again, he indicated the sun, then her hair, saying, "Halloo, Polly." She visualized the page of Bishop Colubra's notebook. Halloo was a form of greeting. Easy enough to remember, the bishop's notebook had contained various greetings used throughout the years. Hello, hello, hail, howdy, hi. The negative na was also simple. No in English, non in French, nicht in German, and yet in Russian. The N sound seemed universal, she thought, except in Greek, where the ne sound meant yes. Tav beamed and burst into a stream of incomprehensible words. She smiled, shaking her head. "Nah." She did not have the vocabulary to say, "I don't understand." Carefully, tenderly, he placed his great spear on the ground. Then he sat beside her on the wall, pointed to the sun. "Sono." Then, with utmost delicacy, his fingertip touched her hair and withdrew. "Rud." He held out his hand, spoke a word, and touched his eyes, spoke again, and touched his nose. He was teaching her words of Ogham. Some of the words, such as sun and red, she recognized from Bishop Colubra's vocabulary list. Others were new to her. Polly was a quick study, and Tav laughed in delight. After they had worked or played together for half an hour, he looked at her and spoke slowly, carefully. "You, son o' Tav." He touched his pale hair. "Mona, you come tonight." She shook her head. It is big festival. Samhain, music, big music, much joy. She could understand him fairly well, but she could not yet put enough words together to explain to him that she had promised not to cross the wall, not to go to the star-watching rock. And did Tav understand that they were separated not only by the stone wall, but by 3,000 years? Suddenly he leaped to his feet. Louise had come out of her hiding place. Tav reached for his spear. "No!" Polly screamed. "Don't hurt her! She's harmless!" If Tav did not understand her words, he could not miss her intent. She thrust herself between the snake and the young man. He put down the spear, careful not to bruise the feathers. "I would only protect you," he said. He told her, in sign and body language as much as in words. "Snake has much power. Mana power. Good power, but sometimes hurting power." Fumblingly, Polly tried to explain that Louise was a harmless black snake and a special one, a family friend. Tav let her know that Louise's friendship was good. "You are gift, the mother's gift. Will you come tonight?" "I cannot. What was the word for promise? Or for grandparents? Mother was something like moder. Mother says no." That was the best she could do. He laughed. "Ha! Mother sent you. You will come." He bent toward her again and delicately touched her hair with the tips of his fingers. It was like a kiss. Then he picked up his spear, walked along the path in the direction of the star-watching rock. Polly went back to the house. His touch had been gentle, pleasing. He had actually compared her red hair to the sun. Her fear of him had vanished, but she also felt confused. Why had he been ready to kill Louise? Did he really think the snake was about to strike? What had he meant by good power and hurting power? His intent had certainly not been to kill for killing's sake, but only to protect her. At lunch, she told her grandparents about Tav. They listened, made little comment. It was evident that they were deeply concerned. "I won't cross the field of the stone wall again," she promised, "but he was nice, really he was." 3,000 years ago? Her grandfather asked wryly. Her grandparents did not scold her for going to the stone wall. They were all unusually silent as they ate lunch. And that is the end of chapter 4.